Dr. Tan Wu Meng.
Mr. Speaker, growth still matters because it creates opportunities for young Singaporeans to rise, the means to maintain our defense, our infrastructure, resources for fiscal redistribution, for the poor, the lost, the least, to build a more inclusive society. And growth itself can shape inequality. As I shared 2 years ago in the budget debate, when a society is low on opportunity, it is the rent seekers and owners of old capital who extract profits. But how we grow also shapes how equal a society we become. For example, economist Cesar Hidalgo at MIT, he has found that countries with higher economic complexity tend to have lower inequality. Some of this is because complex industries need skilled workers supporting enterprises, which means the workers and SMEs have more of a stake in a more equitable economic structure. This also contrasts with less complex economies, simpler economies, where the income distribution may follow the controlling interests of resource ownership. Who owns an oil well, who owns farmland, who owns production facilities. Another finding from Hidalgo's team is that when you study economic structure, you can also see how the pattern of exports evolves over time, usually along what they call adjacencies, which means it diversifies towards products which are similar to the existing exports. But what are the lessons for Singapore? What are the lessons for Singapore? Firstly, good quality growth can reduce income inequality. When you have a diverse economy, more paths for people to rise, more paths for workers and students to do well, everyone building deep skills, everyone having a stake in the workplace, in industry, in the economy. Secondly, we also can see that left to the market alone, the structure of an economy evolves bit by bit, stepwise along adjacencies, which means to transform, there has to be bold effort by industry and government. And Mr. Speaker, we do need to transform, because today, all around, there is disruption, but also opportunity. So how do we get ready for the next 50 years? Looking back for 2 centuries, Singapore benefited from geography, gateway, east and west, trading port, transshipment hub, air hub. But supply chains are being disrupted. Trade routes, many more point-to-point these days, bespoke distributed manufacturing, 3D printing where you can build parts next to where they're going to be assembled. In many Western countries, the mood is not so good about trade, and technology continues to disrupt jobs every day. Furthermore, the very idea of economic geography is also being disrupted. Digital data flow is going to create a parallel world economic order. A world economic order that's digital in parallel to existing geography, whether it's collaboration, competition, or opportunity. Not just digitizing today's businesses, but creating new business models. For example, if you look at life sciences, data science is what turned DNA sequencing into genomics and is what drives personalized medicine, helping patients around the world. E-commerce and retail is more than just going cashless. It's about knowing your customers even better than they know themselves. Artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, they will change factories, assembly lines that adapt, maintenance that predicts what parts are going to fail, better quality control. So, Mr. Speaker, how do we ride this wave? We must ensure that Singapore has a strong position in this new digital economic world order. This means good external connectivity, good pipelines for data. That means when we spend on digital infrastructure, we must see it as investment and not consumption, the same way we invest in the Tuas port and growing Changi Airport. Obvious next steps for a data hub include machine learning and artificial intelligence, AI. In 2015, the New York Times reported the US federal government spent $1 billion on AI research. South Korea, similar amount. China, even more. AI can empower many sectors: drug discovery, factory design, service innovation. I propose that the government invest in an AI technology hub in the same way that we invested many years ago in building the Biopolis, because there's strategic value in Singapore maintaining public sector ownership in AI research, whether it's intellectual property or the insights. Trust and rule of law still matter. So we must maintain our reputation as a trusted jurisdiction for intellectual property and data protection. Because in the future, when someone sequences all 3 billion base pairs of their personal genome, who will they trust? Where will they trust that data with? This means legislation that's up to date or even one step ahead. It also means investing in better communications security, because communications is being disrupted too. Traditional public key encryption, which your HTTPS and other forms of online secure socket layers depend on, all that presumes that factorizing large numbers into individual prime numbers takes a long time, even with a fast computer. But quantum computing is promising to disrupt this by doing that factorizing faster than was thought possible. On the flip side, quantum secured communications are also on the rise, sharing information such that eavesdropping can be detected. So can the government tell us if we will continue funding research like what the NRF is doing at the Center for Quantum Technologies? This may seem like blue skies research, but I see some of this as what I call blue ocean research. Practical applications and a big harvest for those who can catch the dividends early enough. And Mr. Speaker, all these elements of a world-class digital data hub are really within our grasp. Firstly, it doesn't need much land compared to traditional industry. Our fiscal position is better than many other developed economies. So the next step is to invest and converge investments, technology, talent, infrastructure, to create that critical mass of opportunity for Singaporeans and for Singapore. Furthermore, by being a trusted neutral party, a trusted first mover, we can establish common standards in ASEAN with our ASEAN partners, whether it's e-payments, data protection across jurisdictions, and so on, collaborating, learning from each other, working together. We may be a little red dot, but we can help build an ecosystem of interoperable systems to benefit all stakeholders in the region. You might even call it one dot, one web. One shining little red dot, one web of partnerships and networks. Mr. Speaker, if I may continue in Mandarin. 议长先生，如今数码经济方兴未艾，我们应当审时度势，前瞻性的预备成为世界级数据中心，增加相关基础设施的投资，超前立法，让新加坡的安全可靠之名历久弥新，从而成为邻近地区在数据存储方面的首选，并不断向外围扩大知名度和影响力。与此同时，新加坡还应当把握先发优势，与周边国家互相合作，积极推动建立东盟行业通行标准和数据的互通生态系统。您可以把这个设想称之为一点一网，一个熠熠生辉的中心点，一个多元化、 多层次的合作网。议长先生，请让我以英语继续发表。Mr. Speaker, in all this, government has a dual role: minimize risk, maximize opportunity. Both of these help prevent market failure. When we minimize risk, we prevent a race to the bottom. But if there's too much bureaucracy, too many administrative barriers, it gets in the way of people and businesses racing to the top. So today, more than ever, government can and must be an enabler of opportunity, innovation, and growth. And that means the speed of decision-making matters. We need to be fast, and we need to be able to act fast, especially when speed matters. Because in the private sector, in Industry 4.0, a slow decision is often the same as no decision. And if there's no decision, after a while, it becomes a no decision when people take their business and opportunities elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, our civil servants and stat board staff work very hard and try their best. So we must keep on finding ways to empower that Team Singapore to do even better. Can we be better at nurturing and promoting our own unicorns, startups that value at 1 billion or more? How can we be more competitive on this? As a first step, I propose that we establish an expedited fast-track pathway so that potential unicorns can quickly negotiate an IPO in Singapore, especially if the IPO brings strategic value with the company, whether it's the valuation, stimulating the local ecosystem, or growing our national prestige, reputation, and position. Financial overheads matter. How easy is it for SMEs and startups to access credit and funding, especially during the early years, the so-called valley of death, where many enterprises don't quite make it before taking flight? Can we reduce land costs and rental overheads for businesses? Land has to be priced appropriately, but we can be innovative as well. I call upon the government to diversify the approach to industrial, commercial land use and leasing. We can have a market for different kinds of leasing models. There's traditional upfront capital expenditure, but there can also be models with discounted upfront costs in return for profit sharing, or even some extent of equity ownership, and that equity could either be conventional or preferred stock. We can have a market of different models to see what works. Mr. Speaker, we also need to keep Singapore open to world-class talent. We must be a home where the brightest talent of tomorrow will want to settle down and raise children in, while creating jobs, wealth, and opportunities for Singaporeans. And it starts upstream, because when a bright young spark grows up in Singapore, there's that emotional attachment to the little red dot. Sometimes it's home ties, more than any financial incentive, that decides whether a company founder keeps that Singapore footprint even after the startup goes regional or global. Look at Razer, Mr. Speaker. Let's look at Razer, world-class gaming hardware company. As disclosure, I should mention that I do use a Razer mouse. So Razer, a world-class gaming hardware company. They bought THX, the audio company founded by George Lucas. Razer's founder, Tan Min Liang, grew up in Singapore. If he'd grown up elsewhere, we would have one fewer star in our constellation of entrepreneurs. Mr. Speaker, entrepreneurship is also about equality, because when there's innovation and entrepreneurship together, it creates value, wealth, and opportunities, not just for the owners, but the employees and the whole ecosystem. But entrepreneurship is a skill set as well. The World Management Survey by John Van Reenen at the London School of Economics They studied 12,000 organizations, 34 countries. They found that basic management skills account for large differences in productivity and output per worker. But we also know, Mr. Speaker, we also know that children from less well-off families don't get the same access to parental support, to parental experience of having run a business, to other forms of social capital. Fewer chances to learn how to run a business or get an apprenticeship at an SME through networks. Our school system can help bridge that gap. So I call upon the government to study how we can nurture entrepreneurship and skills in our schools, how our education system can facilitate the sharing of skills, the sharing of experiences, so that young Singaporeans have a less steep learning curve on that journey to entrepreneurship, because such skills should not just be the domain of those with prior experience or pre-existing social networks. This is another way we can reduce inequality, grow entrepreneurship, help young Singaporeans to rise up and do well. Mr. Speaker, once upon a time when independence was thrust upon us, we dared as a matter of survival. Today, the economy is being transformed, many policies, many transformations. But beyond this budget, we all must have the audacity to dream big and boldly go where we can position ourselves to ride new trends and new journeys over the next 50 years. And so I stand in support of this budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.